Welcome to Orioles on the Verge. This is Zach Spedden, joined as always by Bob Phelan. Our co-host Nick Stevens is out this week. So Bob and I will be breaking down the first week of Orioles action at the major league level, where things have been very busy and very exciting as the ownership group led by David Rubenstein officially took control of the club last week, right before the Orioles won 4 out of 6 in their opening homestand. We're also going to look at the opening week of the Norfolk Tides, who are hitting the cover off the baseball right now down the International League. But first, as we like to do at the beginning of every episode, we want to welcome some new members to our Patreon community. And for that, I'm going to turn it over to Bob.
Yeah, seems like there's a few people that are as excited about the start of the baseball season as we are. So I want to shout out Cody, James, and Serena. Thank you guys so much for joining up for the Patreon. Hopefully you enjoy the content and it's worth your while. And we really appreciate your support.
And as a reminder, you can join our Patreon community as a paying member for as little as $3 a month. At the $5 and $10 levels, you'll have access to bonus daily coverage, which is underway as the 2024 minor league season has begun. And in our episode later this week, we're going to look at the Bay Sox, Ironbirds, and Shorebirds break camp rosters. But in this episode, we're going to focus primarily on the major leagues and AAA. And we're going to start with the major leagues, as last week was very exciting in Birdland. On Wednesday, David Rubenstein and his ownership group, which includes Cal Ripken Jr., among others, took control of the team. The Orioles responded the following day with an 11-3 win on opening day over the Los Angeles Angels behind a dominant performance from their new ace, Corbin Burnes. They would come back on Saturday and defeat the Angels 13-4 to clinch the series. That would be followed by a 3-game series against the Royals to start this week, which saw the Orioles also take 2 out of 3, albeit in completely different ways. They really did not dominate the Royals by any stretch of the imagination, but in the end, pulled off 2 walk-off wins, including Jordan Westburg's walk-off home run on Monday night, and then James McCann getting the base hit to bring the Orioles back from behind to defeat Kansas City on Wednesday. The Orioles are heading to Pittsburgh on Friday to face the Pirates in their home opener, and their record sits at 4-2. So, Bob, it's been a really interesting and exciting week here in Birdland. What are your thoughts on all of this?
It's so good. It's been so nice to have baseball back in general, have the Orioles just dominate, just good news after good news. And like I said, we should have been swept by the Royals. I mean, it took a walk-off home run by Jordan Westburg and then a big come-from-behind victory on Wednesday in a game that we really had no right on winning, but we ended up doing it anyway. Thank you, Royals, for having Will Smith as your closer and sticking with him. Yeah, I mean, if a team is going to win series like that, when they were playing probably as bad as they're going to play all year, even Corbin Burnes only struck out 3 batters, gave up 9 hits. Like, he just really grinded and battled his way through that start on Wednesday after the 5-hour rain delay. That's what great teams do. And that was fun to see. They dominated the Angels, the Tides. Reinforcements are right there if we need them. And, you know, Tony Kemp, Ramon Urias, Austin Hayes don't get too comfortable on the major league roster. Not off to the greatest starts, but yeah, the guys are coming right behind them. It was a ton of fun. The Rubenstein stuff was great. I loved everything him and his partners were doing and saying. So far, so good. So, yeah, everything's looking up in Birdland, I'd say.
Let's dive a little bit deeper into Burnes, the Orioles' prize acquisition this past offseason. And as you mentioned, his start against Kansas City on Wednesday was not his best. Labored a little bit after a 5-hour rain delay. Managed to get through it, but still only 3 strikeouts over 5 innings of work. That said, Burnes so far through his first 11 2/3 innings pitched as an Oriole has struck out 14 batters, 11 of them in that start against the Angels, while walking just 3. He has given up 10 hits in that span, 9 of them coming against Kansas City. So Burnes, I think what we're seeing, even in that start on Wednesday night, is that he can be a difference maker at the top of this rotation. How do you feel about how he's going to perform the rest of the way?
I am very happy with him at anchoring this rotation. I think, yeah, you saw the best of Burns on opening day, and then you saw not the worst, I'm sure, but just like the not the best stuff, not the finest command last time out, and both were good and both led to Orioles wins. I think if it wasn't opening day and limited to 85-ish pitches, he might have gone 7, who knows, maybe 8 innings if that game is in the middle of the season towards the end of the year. In a must-win game, I think he goes another inning or two and continues to dominate. But yeah, I think he's a great anchor for the rotation. Like I said, Grayson came right behind him and was lights out in his first start of the year as well. He should be pitching tomorrow night against Pirates. Him and Jared Jones. That'll be a fun pitching matchup tomorrow, late afternoon, actually, 4 o'clock. Pirates home opener tomorrow. It'll be interesting to see if Bradish can get back like they expect him to in this first half here. Then to have those three, like we talked about in the offseason, I think that's going to be as good as any teams out there could offer right now, especially with all the pitching injuries across the league. The Orioles might have just by the skin of their teeth avoided a devastating one with Bradish. We'll see, knock on wood. But hey, the Marlins are losing. Maybe we trade for Jesus Luzardo at some point too, and just continue to build this rotation. But I think, Kramer, Wells, and Irvin obviously were not Rodriguez and Burns, but I thought they held their own, except for Irvin. I think he'll be better as a long man, but it's one start, one time through the rotation. It's hard to take too much away from it, but I'm pretty pleased with where we are.
Yeah, Wells in that start against the Angels on Sunday came out of the gate slow, but looked really good over his final few innings. And if the bats had been anywhere near where they had been on Saturday, that would have been an easy win for the Orioles, and they would have closed out the sweep. But that was not meant to be. Let's turn our attention over to the hitters now. And I just have to say the one thing that has really jumped out to me so far is the performance of Ryan Mountcastle. Hit some balls really hard. He had a few tough luck base hits that could have been home runs in a lot of ballparks in that first homestand. Blame the wall, blame the cold weather for a few of those games, especially against Kansas City. Damp air, the ball just is not going to travel out to left field. Despite that, though, Mountcastle comes out of the homestand so far with a 300 average over just 20 at-bats. But the thing that jumps out to me, 4 walks against 3 strikeouts. And overall, just a much better plate approach than what we've seen from him in the past.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we've seen stretches from Mountcastle, I feel like, where he's walking more, striking out less. And actually, I feel like he's struck out less every year that he's been in the majors, and his walk rate might have been slowly going up as well. But it seems like a flip has been switched, because usually he starts off like super free swinging in the beginning of the year, and then he'll kind of start walking more as the year goes on. At least that's how it's gone in the past. But it seems like he's made like an Anthony Santander type of improvement when it comes to swing decisions, at least over the first week of the year. And hopefully that's the case, because we've always known he can hit the ball consistently. So if he's going to stop flailing at the low and away breaking balls, the league could be in trouble, and Mountcastle might be another dangerous weapon. Maybe the young guys coming up like Kjerstad and even Basayo, even lower, these guys that could take some time away from him at first base, or maybe just the fact that he had that vertigo and was like, look, I can't take this for granted. I've got to really step up my game. If that's what led to it, then man, he could be a big time force in the middle of this lineup, in a lineup that need a little more home run power than they had last year. I mean, I don't know if we need anything more than a 101 win team, but I think that was one of the things that was missing a little bit, was that like 30 home run power.
Yeah, I agree. You were kind of looking to Henderson, especially in the second half of last year, and Santander as your home run guys throughout the season last year. And it felt like the other hitters were capable of putting up a good at bat, getting the extra base hit time in and time out, just not necessarily delivering that home run power. So if Mountcastle could give the Orioles another hitter who has that ability this year, that would be big.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, Santander, he's another guy that could put up 30 bombs. And Henderson, I mean, he's looking like a potential MVP candidate across the diamond. He's hitting the ball as hard as ever. consistently. He's had a little bit of bad luck with his batted ball, as has Adley Rutschman, who Adley hasn't even struck out this year so far through 6 games. That's nice to see. But Gunnar making amazing plays at shortstop on defense, hitting home runs, and just hitting the ball hard consistently and having good at bats, batting leadoff. You love to see it. And I think the lineup's only going to improve as the year goes on. I mean, Cowser should start getting more playing time. He's off to a great start with the bat. He looked great in left field in the one game he started, making plays look easy that I think Austin Hayes might have made, but I don't think he would have made them look quite as easy as Cowser did chasing him down. I think he spent like 500, 4 for 8 to start the year, something like that. So, yeah, I think Ramon Arias and Austin Hayes are the guys. Unfortunately for them, those are the guys that everyone's like been not wanting around as much, even though they're solid players. Unfortunately for them, they're the guys off to the slowest starts. So that only just makes everything even worse as far as the fan backlash. But I think when all is said and done, this is an offense that's probably going to score 4 or 5 runs a game on average, and that should be good enough to win another 90 plus games. And I think the offense is only going to get better, as we'll talk about later in this episode, when certain guys come up and push other guys out of the way.
If you're looking at the first 6 games, which is just that, 6 games, don't want to read too much into it, but has there been anything you've seen to this point, maybe with the team as a whole or with a few players, that's concerning to you?
Austin Hayes. I know he came into spring and he had lost some weight. I think it was intentional. I think he said he wanted to slim down a little bit. To me, he just looks slow, like even slower than he did last year. He's just crushing the ball into the ground, which is not a recipe for success. To me, I don't know how long I'm sure he'll end up hitting like 250 with a 750 OPS if he gets regular playing time. I'm not saying that the player that he was through the first 6 games is who he's going to continue to be, but I'm just not sure how long he's going to be able to hold off a rising Cowser, a Kjerstad who's batting like 600 in AAA with 20 some RBIs already in their 6 games of the season. And I don't know. I think that to me, and Arias, he's not even been hitting the ball hard so far. Those 2 guys, unfortunately, I just think at some point room is going to have to be made. And those guys, if it's not a trade, it might have to be an injury or a DFA, at least when it comes to Arias. Those, to me, on the hitting side would be concerning. As far as pitching, I don't really see too much to be worried about on the pitching side. I feel like the bullpens pitched pretty well. Jonathan Heasley even looked good in his 2 innings that he got the other day. Kimbrel gave up the blown save and gave up a run, but really it was a dink of a hit, then 2 stolen bases, and he could have been a call out at third base. Like, I thought he actually looked pretty good. Really, it's just Cole Irvin and Dean Kramer or Tyler Wells, whichever one doesn't make it, doesn't stick in the rotation once Bradish and Means come back. I think once those guys are pushed to the bullpen, I think it's a pretty complete team, to be honest with you.
What concerned me the most about Kimbrel in his blown save was that he just kept falling behind the count. I think the blown save itself, when you analyze what happened in that inning, like you said, it's a blooper of a base hit that any of Arias, Henderson, or Hayes could have caught. But I think they were just all 3 a little out of position in that moment. And then you go to a pinch runner who not only is fast enough, but bold enough to steal 2 bases, including third, in that tight spot, and you get to run across. That's not going to happen most nights. Probably not going to happen to Kimbrel again for the rest of the season. I just want to see what his command looks like. And, in fairness to him, this has to be a weird feeling that we're now a week into the season. He's only pitched just once, and the team he's playing for is 4-2. So the Orioles have not had a lot of save situations to this point. In fact, I think his outing was the only one they've had so far in the 9th inning. So we'll see what comes with Kimbrel and with the rest of this Orioles team as the season goes on. But as we mentioned, they are off on Thursday, and then they head to Pittsburgh on Friday afternoon, with Grayson Rodriguez getting the ball as they begin their first road trip of the season. Down to AAA level, the Norfolk Tides, your reigning AAA national champions, with a different team, have essentially picked up right where they left off last year. Not only are they winning games, but they're winning games by scoring a lot of runs. And that was best exemplified on Wednesday night when they defeated the Charlotte Knights 26-11. Now, as we're recording this, Charlotte is getting back at them with a 17-6 lead in the top of the eighth on Thursday night. But even if the Tides do lose that game, they'll drop to 4-2 on the season. And what has really jumped out so far has been the offense. And Bob, you touched on it. You brought up a few guys specifically, including Heston Kjerstad. What has stood out to you about the Tides lineup so far?
I was putting some stats on the Discord. Like, if you look at the AAA home run leaders to date, it's like 4 of the top 7 are for the Tides. Here, I'm trying to pull this up real quick. Let's see. The stats I put are the Tides' top 5 hitters, which is Jackson Holliday, Connor Norby, Kobe Mayo, Heston Kjerstad, and Kyle Stowers are combined. This was through the first 2 innings of tonight's game. They were batting .449 with 45 runs, 15 doubles, a triple, 15 home runs, and 55 RBI, while the rest of the team, just every other person that has gotten a bat, batting .270 with 22 runs, 4 doubles, 1 triple, 5 home runs, and 9 RBIs. So just these top 5 hitters who are like the guys that are desperate to get to the majors, are major league ready probably in many other organizations right now. They're just banging down the door. Heston Kjerstad might be the hottest start I've ever seen at any level of baseball from the first week of play. I mean, coming into tonight, he was batting .583 with the 1785 OPS, and he's only gone on to have an RBI single and a 2-run homer tonight. Kyle Stowers was batting .400 with the 1500 OPS. He had an RBI double in the first inning. Kobe Mayo batting .385 with an OPS over 1,000. Connor Norby .435 with an OPS approaching 1,400. Jackson Holliday batting .400 with an OPS over 1,200 coming into tonight. And they're not having quite the fireworks tonight that they had in the first 2 games of this series. But, I mean, these guys are saying, look, we're not going to give you any reason other than there's no room, or you want us to reach a certain date or a certain just before you bring us up. We're not going to give you any other excuse like we're struggling. No, it's not going to happen. Not to start the year. Even guys like Peyton Burdick are into it with 3 home runs, a guy who the Orioles clearly wanted because they traded for him. They tried to sneak him through waivers. He got claimed, and then they picked him back up on waivers. He's been performing, hits the ball really hard. Billy Cook hasn't got much playing time, but he's 4 for 8 on the season so far. It's just been a ton of fun to watch, honestly. And I'm really happy for those guys because they deserve some major league time. And if they keep this up, there's going to be no choice but to make room for them.
Yeah, as a correction to what I said earlier, the Tides were only trailing 7-6 at the time we were recording this. So still very much in the game as of when we were talking about it on Thursday night. I think what has stood out so far is that all of these players that you mentioned are taking really quality at bats. You look at the fact that Holliday is still as patient as ever at the plate. Kjerstad and Stowers, I think, are continuing the progression they've had with their swing decisions, and Norby and Mayo showing that as well. So that has really been what has jumped out to me. You think that younger players who are eager to show that they belong in the major leagues, which frankly, some if not all of them do, would be pressing at the plate right now, maybe being a little overly aggressive. That has not been the case at all.
No, it's like you said, they're taking good at bats, even if there's not a ton of walks. They're working the count. You can see the swing decisions are there. And I guess the only thing really, the infield defense hasn't been that great so far to date. So if the Orioles want to say, hey, we want you guys to get more comfortable defensively, that might be warranted, at least based off the early errors. And really, it's mostly throwing errors and nothing too alarming, but we'll see in a few weeks if that can get tightened up, then there's even less of an excuse to keep them down.
We'll focus on Holliday specifically for a moment because one of the things that Mike Elias touched on in explaining the Orioles' decision to send him back to AAA was more so the experience, the lack of experience overall at AAA level, and the lack of experience against high-level left-handed pitching. In his first at bat of the season at Norfolk, Halladay hit a home run off a left-handed pitcher. That doesn't mean the case is closed, but it shows that the development curve may not be as steep as we think it is. Look, taking into account what he's done to plate so far and maybe some of the unevenness we've seen in the field, I think would be a fair way to describe it. How long do you think Halladay's actually in AAA? And I know we talked about this last week with Connor Newcomb, but has your opinion changed since then?
Hasn't particularly changed. I think I predicted that he'd be up for the Red Sox series because they have a bunch of right-handed pitchers in the middle of next week. I might lean towards more like a May 1st, right around there, to bring him up, and maybe Mayo, maybe Kerstad, guys like that. I mean, Kerstad's less of a May 1st thing. If they want to get his bat here, or even Norby to replace the Tony Kemp, who I still don't understand why the Orioles signed, I think they could do that sooner rather than later, but May 1st makes the most sense around there. You'll be comfortably over that extra year of service time if that's the game you want to play. So nothing's really changed other than just I'm not so sure if they're going to rush him up the way I thought they might last week.
I do wonder because we've seen the Orioles in the past try to stagger out their prospects as much as they can in terms of promotions. We saw that last year with Westberg, Cowser, and Kerstad. Now, keeping in mind that Kerstad has been to the major leagues already, do you think they treat him a little bit different where it's not going to be, okay, we have to bring Heston Kerstad up now, then wait a month and bring up Halladay? Do you think because he's been in the major leagues, they might treat him more the way they treated Stowers last year, which was Anita rises, we're going to bring him up and see what he can do?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, they know what he's got. He made the playoff roster last year. Didn't get in a bat, but I mean, they at least trusted him enough and thought highly of him enough that they put him on the playoff roster. He played pretty well down the stretch last year in his first taste. Clearly didn't have the best spring, but is on fire now. I was calling him the Barrel King on the daily today because that's what he does best. He doesn't necessarily hit the ball as hard as a Kobe Mayo, but he always seems to hit the perfect launch angle with the 95 plus mile per hour exit velocities. And I really think they want to get him more comfortable at first base. I wonder if, let's say that Kobe Mayo or Jackson Halladay could be tied to a Ramon Urias possible trade early in the season. Maybe Kerstad is tied to a Ryan O'Hearn in a similar fashion because O'Hearn's been playing first base, DH, right field. I feel like that's the same exact thing Kerstad could do. And I think the upside with Kerstad's bat is obviously a little bit higher than Ryan O'Hearn, even though he's performing pretty well so far and last year. So an injury or a trade to Ryan O'Hearn might be what it takes. But if they don't mind, if he's only playing 4 or 5 times a week, 3 to 5 times a week, and they want to have him as another lefty bat off the bench, and Tony Kemp is just not cutting it vibes wise, I don't know. I feel like he's an option, and Connor Norby's been playing a lot of corner outfield so far this season in the minor leagues. I wonder if that could be the right-handed version if they really want to go that way with a power hitting impact bat off the bench.
The fact that Norby has been playing right field early on a lot has been interesting because you knew he would have to go somewhere when Jackson Halladay was on second base. But we also know that the one knock on Norby throughout his really going back to his days at ECU has been the lack of versatility. He's not a guy you can play at shortstop. He doesn't have the speed to play center field. He doesn't necessarily have the arm for third base, at least according to some accounts. But I think the Orioles are slotting him into the other position on the field where he would make the most sense at the major leagues because you do have that short right field at Camden Yards where the speed and the arm aren't going to be as much of a concern as they would be for left, which is what you're going to reserve for a guy like Cowser, who in the limited sample we've seen so far this season has shown he can cover that space.
Yeah, I'm very intrigued by Norby in right field actually, and yeah, maybe there is a way they can keep him around, and maybe he's not necessarily just a trade opportunity for the club because there's a lot of left-handed hitters: Kowser, Kerstad, Holiday, Basayo coming up behind him. You got Mayo and Norby as the big right-handed hitters, and maybe maybe he can be like that Terran Vavra second base slash corner outfield, not center field the way Vavra played a little bit, but a guy with a little more versatility, even if it's only a little bit, then maybe that's enough to get him in the rotation there and at least be an option early in his career.
Go over the pitching staff for the Tides now, and I only bring up McDermott because so far he's the only starter that has had two starts. He pitched the Tides opener, and he's pitching tonight as we were recording at Charlotte. And in both of those starts, he struggled a bit with his command. Walk total is a little bit higher than you would like to see from him. Are you concerned about that at all?
Concerned is a strong word. I mean, that's always been his thing. It's earlier in the year. We know bare minimum he's going to be a high leverage reliever just with the stuff that he has. I'll say I'm no more concerned than I was coming into the year just because it's only two starts. Let's see what happens when he just continues to get comfortable. He is in AAA again, working with those robo umps. At least I don't know if they're doing it full time this year, but I know at least one of his walks when I was watching live in his first start was initially called a strike three, and then on review it was overturned to a walk. It's not super concerned. He's still getting a lot of swings and misses. I think it's just a matter of him continuing to develop and try to pound the zone.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not really worried about it to this point either. I had the chance to do the daily after Norfolk's opener last week, and as I was combing through the pitch data for McDermott, I'm like, you know what? This actually was, in a lot of respects, a good start. Fastball's hitting 95. He's generating a lot of swings and misses. The strikeout totals were decent, but the walks were a little high. And the two things that I think were a little bit different about this year, or at least one thing that's keep in mind about this year, is that he did have the back injury at the end of last season that cost him probably two or three starts at the end of the year, maybe, and then had to ramp his way back up. Then, although he looked good in spring training, the short outings that he has there aren't really the best primers for what he's going to have to do in the regular season. And then the other thing is that, to the point of the robo lumps, I have not seen, I don't know if you've seen how they're developed this year, but I kind of question with something that is still early in its stage of use, whether or not it's consistent from year to year. And if any adjustments that he could have made last year to that strike zone would apply this year. And I don't know, it could be that it's calibrated the same way and it's working the same way it did last year, but I wouldn't be surprised if something's just a little bit different.
Yeah, I would. That wouldn't surprise me either. I'm really not sure. Like I said, I'm not even sure if they're still doing the half robo umps, half challenge system. I'm not sure if they're just doing robo umps full time. I'm really not sure. There hasn't been a ton of coverage that I've seen on that, but yeah, I'm still pretty high on McDermott and Cade Povich. I was talking about his start on the daily this morning, and wow, he was great. 6 shutout innings, 1 hit, no walks, 5 strikeouts. Like I was saying, though, he would do this last year and then follow it up with a bomb of a start where he was inconsistent, good, bad, good, bad. I'm really interested to see how he does Sunday against the same lineup, and if he can put 2 starts back to back, then maybe he's taking the lead back from McDermott. I think it's like a 3 or 4 horse race for the best pitching prospect in the system. It's going to be fun to track.
Yeah, so far, Povitz has had by far the best individual start of any Tides pitcher with his performance against Charlotte on Tuesday night. The thing that I want to see the most from Povich early in the year is keeping the ball in the ballpark, because that was where he ran into problems last year. Was in his bad starts. He gave up a couple of home runs. I think there was one start early on at Norfolk last summer where he was cruising along and then all of a sudden had a bad inning and gave up a grand slam. And that was early in his Tides tenure. And he had a few starts like that before at Bowie, not necessarily where he'd give up a grand slam, but he'd string together 1 or 2 decent innings, then get into a jam and give up a home run. So even if the walks are a little bit high at the beginning of the year, I'm okay with that as long as I see the home run totals coming down, especially because although the Tides lineup is proving a little bit different right now, this is the time of year where it's generally easy to keep the ball in the ballpark down at Harbor Park.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I felt like the command was on point for Povich in that start. He was able to drop that curveball in for a strike. I want to say 5 or 6 times. So when he's got that going, it's pretty hard to touch him. And on the opposite end of the spectrum was Justin Armbruster's first start, where he couldn't throw his breaking pitches for a strike to save his life and had to rely strictly on his cutter and fastball, and unfortunately got punished for it.
Well, and as we had that conversation, the Tides took the lead over Charlotte. It is currently 8-7 in the bottom of the eighth. How that turns out, you will know. There's some dramatic irony here for the listeners of this show, because we're going to wrap up our discussion now on the Orioles and the Tides. But in part 2 later this week, we're going to dive into the break camp rosters for the Bowie Bay Sox, Aberdeen Ironbirds, and Delmarva Shorebirds. You're not going to want to miss that. In the meantime, you can check us out on our many social media channels, including Facebook, Instagram, Threads, X, TikTok, and YouTube. You also are going to want to head over to Substack, OriolesOnTheVerge.substack.com. And if you become a subscriber, you can have access to my breakdown of the break camp rosters for the Shorebirds, Ironbirds, and Bay Sox. We're going to break that down a little bit more in our next episode. For Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens, this is Zach Spedden. You've been listening to Orioles on the Verge, part of the Believe Podcast Network.
And then relief pitcher Danny Mendick just hit a home run to tie it up 8-8 in the bottom of the eighth.
Just going back and forth down there.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Welcome to Orioles on the Verge. This is Zach Spedden, joined as always by Bob Phelan. Our co-host Nick Stevens is out this week. So in tonight's episode, Bob and I will be breaking down the break camp rosters for the Bowie Bay Sox, Aberdeen Ironbirds, and Delmarva Shorebirds. The 3 lower full season levels, AA, High A, and Low A, get started a week later in the minor league schedule than the AAA season. The AAA season now runs longer than the other 3 levels. But we can now have the full sense of how talented the Orioles farm system is going into 2024 when you look at these teams. And we're going to break that down tonight, club by club. And Bob, I'll just kind of start with your general thoughts. If you look at these 3 rosters, I think that where most of the intrigue for people who follow prospects right now is on Norfolk, because they have Jackson Holliday, they have Kobe Mayo. Their lineup is tearing the cover off the ball right now. But these other 3 rosters each present their own strengths going into the season.
Yeah, like I was saying on the daily this week, it's been really fun to have the Orioles back in action. Norfolk off to an amazing start, but the real meat of our season, all the minor league teams, all the affiliates, all playing at the same time, pretty much every night, starts now until the end of September, or at least the middle of September. So this is where it gets really exciting, where we're juggling between games and trying to keep track of all the action every night. And I look at all these break camp rosters and I'm like, do I need to get 4 TVs in my living room? Because these are 4 incredibly exciting teams. You know, we'll get into more specifics, but I was surprised to see some people that made it to Bowie, some people that are starting at Aberdeen, I thought would be starting in Delmarva, and vice versa. But I'm just really excited to get this going and to see, you know, who breaks out in a big way, who gets moved up, who gets promoted quickly, who struggles even. Like I'm so into it. I couldn't be more excited for the baseball season to fully kick into gear Friday night.
And we'll start this conversation with the Bay Sox, whose roster is headlined by Samuel Basallo, currently ranked 3rd on our top prospect list for the Orioles farm system. Most outlets have him 2nd or 3rd, and he's a consensus top 100 prospect in baseball. He's going to be joined in what's a pretty solid Bay Sox lineup by a handful of other solid prospects, including Frederick Bencosme and Max Wagner in the infield. You shift over the outfield, you have Judd Fabian, John Rhodes, Dylan Beavers, and Dante Williams. It feels like every year the Bay Sox get the break camp roster that has the outfield where you look at it and think, how is a ball going to drop in the grass all year? Because there's two center fielders on that roster in Fabian and Williams. And then you have two pretty solid corner guys in their own right with Beavers and Fabian, or Beavers and Rhodes. So when you look at this lineup, Bob, what jumps out at you?
The first thing, honestly, I know I predicted it, but Frederick Bencosme starting at 21 years old, shortstop of the AA Bowie Bay Sox, super exciting to me. Felt like he got a little bit of run in spring training. Our interview with him, obviously, I feel like the organization is very confident and comfortable with where he's at, and it's exciting to me to see the leaps that he's going to make in a much more hitter-friendly ballpark compared to Aberdeen. He's still incredibly young. We've talked about it. That was the first thing. I was happy for him that he got to start in AA Bowie, but really it's all eyes on Samuel Basayo, who I think he says everything's going well with his elbow. He expects to be playing first base and catcher again by the end of the month, maybe early May. So I just want to see the damage he can do with the bat, because my goodness, the upside is enormous with him. But yeah, like you said, this lineup top to bottom is going to be really good. It's a lot of guys that ended the year in Bowie, but like Fabian, Rhodes, Beavers, Williams, the entire outfield is back. Wagner is back. Colin Burns healthy. TT Bowens is back. Anthony Servideo getting one last chance. Silas Ardoin. So it's just a veteran quote unquote group for Bowie, but at the same time, especially a guy like Rhodes, who this is his third year where he'll be in Bowie, make or break a little bit for him. But let's just see how you've adjusted and adapted at this level and the improvements that you've made.
Yeah, I agree. It's a solid infield there for the Bay Sox when you add in guys like Burns, Bowens, and Servideo. And one thing that I think is really going to help this pitching staff is that the Bay Sox are going to have the guy who's probably going to end up getting the lion's share of playing time behind the plate, Basayo, not catch for the first month of the season, most likely. Yet you still have Silas Ardway and Connor Pavloni behind the plate, two solid defensive catchers. And in the case of Ardway, a guy who was showing some real progress at the plate last year. And while this has not been unsurprising when you dig into the stats with some of the Orioles hitters over the last few years, that a guy would perform better at Bowie than he does at Aberdeen, the difference last year with Ardway, when he went from Aberdeen to Bowie, was pretty stark. Hitting the ball more consistently, the walk numbers, I believe, were better. The on-base numbers overall were better. So I know the bat is a big question mark with him, but the defense can stick. And I'm really interested to see what he does with a full season at AA.
Yeah, absolutely. By all accounts, he's just an incredible receiving catcher, good defensive, good all around when it comes to leading a staff. I feel like he's, it's tough when you have Samuel Basayo and Adley Rushman as your catchers of the future. But between him and Maverick Hanley, I feel like those two guys are going to be just amazing to have as AAA guys, third, fourth catcher, where if someone goes down, even if it's just a short-term injury, these guys are completely comfortable with bringing up and being the backup catcher for the major league team. So yeah, excited for him. He walks a lot. If he can start to hit the ball with more authority, more consistently, like he did towards the end of the year, then yeah, that would be fantastic.
Turn our attention to the pitching staff now, because top to bottom, this looks like a pretty strong group. You're going to have Seth Johnson, Alex Pham, and Trace Bright in the starting rotation, among others. Three guys who look like they're poised to have big seasons. Not to mention you throw in Brandon Young and Zach Peak, who are returning from injuries. And if you've read my article in Substack yet, you know that this is the guy that I picked as breakout candidate for the Bay Sox, Keegan Gillies, down in the bullpen. He may have broken out already, but I think he could be even better in 2024. So really solid starting rotation to begin the year for the Bay Sox. Pham penciled in right now as the opening day starter when Bowie takes on Reading on Friday night. What do you see from this group going into this season?
It's like we talked about in our roster prediction episode. I mean, this is just a loaded pitching staff. Didn't even mention Trey McGowl, Kyle Branovich, Kyle Verbitsky, was happy to see him get the bump up to Double A. Ryan Long. I feel like there was one more guy, Dylan Hyde, who I think is along the same lines as Keegan Gillies, is a relief pitcher breakout as well. I just think this pitching staff is going to be tantalizing to watch. Even Carlos Tavera he's like the John Rhodes for me of the pitching staff, where it's like, you got to do it. This is the year. Like, it's now or never. So yeah, I'm super excited to see these pitchers night in and night out. I think Pham, especially, he looked amazing in his little brief glimpses that we saw in spring training. Trace Bright, that prospect game was electric. Seth Johnson, we know, has the stuff. And yeah, Young, Bernovich, and Peak, they're back from their injuries, and I'm excited to see what they've got to offer. They have a lot to prove. So it's going to be really cool to watch.
We'll go down to Aberdeen now, and if you want to get your dose of 2023 draft picks, you're going to want to tune into Ironbirds games a lot early in the season, because several of the Orioles position players from that draft class who stood out last summer are returning to Aberdeen or debuting at Aberdeen to begin this season, including Enrique Bradfield Jr., Matthew Etzel in the outfield. Then in the infield, Matt Horvath, who ended last season with the Ironbirds, will be back, while Tavian Josenberger, who spent more time in Delmarva but picked up the pace offensively towards the end of the season, will also be part of the Ironbirds infield. The infield as a whole, looking at the guys aside from Horvath and Josenberger, you have Jalen Vasquez, a 2023 draft pick, who put together a nice run at Delmarva last summer, Carter Young, Isaac De Leon, and Ryan Higgins. In the outfield, you have Bradfield and Etzel to go along with Elio Prado and Reed Trimble, who we're hoping can stay healthy this year. And then on the catching behind the plate, you're going to have Creed Willems leading a group that also includes Adam Retzbach and Randy Florentino. So this is a really interesting group of position players, but I'm going to start with Bradfield because we know what Bradfield's strengths are. They're apparent if you watch just a single inning of him play. He can run, and he can cover center field like nobody else. The question is the bat. How do you see that developing this year?
Hopefully pretty well. I mean, we saw him a little bit in spring training. I think you didn't see much. I mean, he is what he is. He's never going to be like a huge impact bat, not much of a power hitter, but we saw the speed and we saw what he can do defensively. Like you said, that's going to be just on display night in and night out. I would expect him to get on base at a 400 plus clip, maybe bat. I'd love to see him bat above 260 at least. I don't know. Really, it's just get on base because that's where he's most effective. You get on base, doesn't matter how, and then work from there. He's going to score first to home on a double. He's going to steal bases. He's going to do some damage out there. And Kirby Mayer just hit a home run. That's why I was distracted. Yeah, he's going to be so much fun to watch. I am going to be trying to get out to an Ironbirds game early in the season because I'm not sure how long he's going to be there. Just because he's a pretty complete player outside of the hit tool potentially so far. I think he'll be in Bowie by June, but we'll see.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to be at Aberdeen that long because I have the utmost confidence that he's going to get on base consistently. And the defense, you're not really putting him in high A to develop his defense. He's beyond that, I think, at this point. The thing that I would say for anyone who's going to try to look at the stat line of Bradfield to figure out his progress is don't look at home runs. He's in a ballpark that is not a home run hitter's haven to begin with. And he himself is not a home run hitter. The big thing I think you really want to look for is just the raw extra base hit total. And then the WRC plus, because that's going to tell you how he's doing as a hitter compared to the rest of the league. Now, looking at the rest of Aberdeen's lineup, what jumps out at you?
I have to say, I did not expect Josenberger to be listed as an infielder over an outfielder, but I guess it doesn't really matter because I know he can play a little bit of second base, but I'm sure he'll get time in the outfield as well. Matt Horvath just stands out as the big time breakout with the bat. And I'm very curious to see what Creed Willems does in the beginning of the year, just because we saw how much he improved Delmarva repeating that level. I want to see if he can do something similar when it comes to Aberdeen. I would not. It's not as exciting, I feel like, as last year's draft pick laden Aberdeen team out of the break, just because I feel like for once the Orioles were pitching heavy in the draft. So Jalen Vasquez, I thought he was really impressive after the draft. I'd love to see what he can do as a late pick. Carter Young, he was having exit velocities above 100, like in the mid 100s in his brief spring training time in the prospect game. So heard some good things about his improvements over the offseason. Would love to see that continue into the season. I'm a big fan of Isaac De Leon, and again, still super young and still has the tools where these international guys can have down years, but that doesn't mean they aren't learning and improving. So curious to see what he does as well.
Yeah, our co-host Nick Stevens actually wrote about Creed Williams on our Substack back in January, and pointing out, I think for good reason, why we should not write off Williams, despite the fact that he struggled last year at Aberdeen. The thing that I think makes Williams' development a little bit challenging at this point is he had not had a lot of professional experience before he went to Delmarva in 2022. He gets up there and is a primary catcher working with a really young pitching staff. He gets settled in there at the plate last year, tearing the cover off the ball, and then goes to Aberdeen. And again, as a catcher, you're going to have that double responsibility of learning how to hit at the plate and learning how to catch a higher level of baseball, which is always going to make things a little bit challenging. But for a young guy, I think there's still a lot of potential here.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I didn't even mention Matthew Etzel, who another breakout potential in the outfield. We saw he had a great season after the draft. And Reed Trimble, for him, I just am hoping that he has a healthy season. Like, stay on the field. I want to see what he can do. Happy to see him out there. I wasn't quite sure if we would ever see him again in Orioles uniform. So I'm happy that he's listed here.
Completely agree. And we'll turn now to the pitching staff, which has a really, really interesting mix of arms in it, because you have some 2023 draft picks who did not pitch at all last year, making the jump right to high A in Jackson Baumeister, Zach Fruit, and Levi Wells. Teddy Sharkey, one of the handful of pitchers who, in fact, one of the only pitchers the Orioles took last year that did pitch last summer, goes to Aberdeen to begin this season. I don't expect him to be there very long. And then you round this group out with some guys that we have in our top 50, like Davey Cruz, Juan Nunez, Carter Baumler, some guys that we are really high on personally, like Edgar Portes and Yaki Rivera. And then one other guy that I left out of that group for the top 50, Cameron Weston, who was really good at Aberdeen last year. And Bob, you had touched on the fact that there were some guys at different levels than you were expecting them to be. Was Weston one of them? Because the numbers kind of show that he might be ready for Bowie.
Yeah, and I think, again, that's just the glut of great pitchers that are in Bowie. I think it won't be long before he's up there in Bowie. But honestly, what I was really talking about was the trio of Davey Cruz, Moises Chase, Juan De Los Santos, and Edgar Portes a little bit. I know he made it up there in Aberdeen towards the end of the year, but those first three, those are guys who I was like, they deserve to be in Aberdeen, but I feel like there's no room, and they'll start back in Delmarva at least to begin the year. And I'm happy for them that they get to graduate to that next level. And in response, a guy like Luis De Leon didn't make the Aberdeen roster when I thought he might, but I think it's really cool for those guys to get that graduation. But like you said, really the highlight is Jackson Baumeister, Zach Fruit, Levi Wells. To jump them straight to Aberdeen, that says I'm really intrigued, especially Wells and Fruit. Baumeister we thought would probably be with the Ironbirds, but those guys to jump right there, that says a lot as far as the confidence that the organization has in them. And Juan Nunez and Carter Baumler too. Don't forget those two great pitching prospects. So again, just year the pitcher. Here it is again. Yaki Rivera, Teddy Sharkey, two electric relief prospects. Yeah, I'm excited.
Aberdeen's roster reflects the fact that I think we're in a little bit of uncharted territory this year as far as the Mike Elias era of Orioles baseball is concerned, because the Orioles had a really pitching heavy draft last year. Their first where they targeted that many pitchers under Mike Elias. And then the Orioles opted to not pitch a lot of those guys last summer coming out of college, which is not unusual around the major leagues. In fact, I would guess that that's kind of a growing trend right now when you look around the other 30 organizations. Now you have them going right to high A. With that in mind, how should fans kind of handle their expectations for a guy like Baumeister, who has a really high ceiling, has some of the best raw stuff in this organization, but also has not pitched professionally yet and is going to have to go to a level that a lot of people that we've had on the show as players and coaches will tell us is a tough level to adjust to.
Yeah, absolutely. I think all you have to do is look back to Trey Sprite in the first month last year. Look back at Cal Verbitsky in the first month last year. Two guys who ended the year incredibly strong and are well in our radar, top 30, top 50, what have you. Don't be losing your mind if Baumeister has a little bit of a slow start. Maybe he's walking too many guys. Maybe he's getting hit a little bit hard. There will be adjustments, and I think by the end of the season, we'll know why he was a third round pick. And just be a little bit patient, especially these guys. They're jumping straight into the deep end. High A is a big jump from low A, so they're not even really going to be able to get their feet wet. Very curious to see how they do, but it's not the end of the world if there are a little bit of struggles. And also just wanted to shout out Preston Johnson making the roster and Luis Sanchez, two guys I think have battled injuries, and I'll be curious to see how they look now that they're healthy.
Yeah, they're both intriguing arms there. I agree with you. What I would add on to your point, and I fully agree with what you were just saying about Baumeister and the other 2023 draft picks that are making this jump. The thing I would add on to that, too, is to not get too much into the highs and lows. You got to factor in that with the minor league schedule set the way that it is, where teams play each other for 6-7 games in a row, starters are going to sometimes throw twice in a series against the same team. So they might come out and dominate in that first outing. Second time out, go out and struggle, or vice versa, because the lineup makes an adjustment to them or they make an adjustment to the lineup. That's just part of the development that we've seen in the last few years as the minor leagues have shifted the schedule, and I don't expect it to be any different this season. We'll wrap up here with the Delmarva Shorebirds, and as has been the case in the last few years, the Shorebirds have a lot of really young, talented players who don't have a lot of professional experience on their break camp roster. So I'm looking at guys like Braylon Tavera, Leandro Arias, Aaron Estrada, who we are all three pretty high on, and we think that they're going to be very good, not to mention Thomas Sosa to throw a fourth in there. But we've seen some young hitters go to Delmarva in the last couple of years, struggle to make that adjustment. And speaking of that, Anderson De Los Santos, a guy who's in our top 50, hits the ball about as hard as anybody when he's locked in, but struggled a little bit at Delmarva, is going back there this year, and he's going to hope to follow the path that Darrell Hernandez did in 2022 and Creed Willems did last year, which is to build off of the ups and downs that they had at Delmarva the year before and come out of the gate hot and make their way to Aberdeen quickly. So if you're looking for someone who fits that mold this year, that could be Anderson De Los Santos. And then you look at the catchers that the Shorebirds are going to have: Bragan Hernandez and Yudis Mordan and Cole Ehrman. Not to mention the outfield, they've got, Bob, I know one of your favorite prospects, the tool said Jake Cunningham. I'm hoping we see Cunningham in center field a lot early this season because I want to see those 5 tools on display. So let's just start with Cunningham before we get into the rest of the roster. I think that it's still sort of a question mark for a lot of fans because they've heard a lot of praise about Cunningham, but his college season last year, lost a couple of weeks early on because of an ankle injury. He only played in 14 games after the draft last year. What are reasonable expectations for him coming into this season?
I'll try to be reasonable. I think reasonable expectations for him are to flash those tools, maybe have a John Rhodes circa 2021 type of year where he gets off to a really fast start. I think he'll have not too many issues with low A. I would imagine he's only there because of the guys that from the draft that advanced further at the end of last year. Once, say, Bradfield's up in Bowie, I think Cunningham could easily be quickly pulled up to join them in Aberdeen. But I expect him to, honestly, I expect him to get to Double A Bowie at some point this year and get his feet wet there by the end of the year. I expect him to hit for power, steal some bases, show off the arm and the defense. And yeah, I think the sky's the limit. I'm just hoping, like John Rhodes, he can stay healthy. I think that's a key for him. But man, this offense is going to be must watch every night.
Yeah, and out of the group of players that are coming to Delmarva for the first time this year, Tavera, Sosa, Arias, Estrada, any other players you could throw in there, who do you think maybe has the smoothest transition?
I think it's going to be Leandro Arias. I think, like I've mentioned, the fact that he got into a spring training game kind of early on, I feel like the way he improved from the DSL to the FCL, just his tools in general, I feel like he's going to be pretty smooth. I think he'll still get on base. He might be more of a, let's see, Frederick Ben Cosme type, where the hit tool is going to play at this level more than it will in Aberdeen when he eventually gets there. But I think he'll be pretty smooth. And I don't know. I think Tavera, Sosa, Estrada, and him, like, I feel like one of them is going to take off running. Two of them are going to be like normal development cycle, and one might be like the Anderson De Los Santos, where it's like you can see the potential, but it's not going to fully unlock to the next year. But as far as other sleeper breakouts, I think Anutis Mordon is there at catcher. I think he got a sneak peek at Delmarva late last year, and he's got serious power. And I think Angel Tejada, he played a lot in low A Delmarva last year and held his own pretty well for a guy who, again, is super young. I think he's only 20, 21 years old. And he's repeating the level as well, just like Anderson De Los Santos. I would not be surprised if he took a little bit more of a step than many are expecting. And Steven Acevedo as well. Like we've shown last year, he got better and better as the year went on. I would not be surprised if he's like really knocking the cover off the ball early in the season.
Yeah, good call on Mordon. I think that he's going to add a real, a lot of power to this lineup. For the guy that I think is going to handle Delmarva fairly easily despite his age, I'm going with Tavera, just because he has such a solid plate approach for a player as young as he is. And he really improved across the board as a hitter last year. Strikeout numbers were better. Strikeout to walk numbers were better. The power went up. And that was the one knock on him coming out of the Dominican Summer League is, and there just doesn't seem to be much power here. Well, the power came out a little bit more last year. And I think you're going to start to see that progression where each year, at least for the next couple of years, maybe 2 or 3 years, he's going to take that step forward when it comes to power. And let's talk about De Los Santos for a minute before we go over to the pitching staff. There were some ups and downs with him last year. He could have stretches where he was hitting the ball hard and he was hitting home runs, or the balls were finding gaps. He was getting extra base hits. And for all the struggles he had, his strikeout numbers weren't awful. But we know that there's a lot of ways for him to improve this year. What are some of the things you want to see him check off in his development as he goes back to Delmarva?
Mostly it's just strike out a little bit less, walk a little bit more. He hits the ball hard, get to it more often, more consistently. Just basically it comes down to consistency. I just want him to see the ball better, hit it hard, which he already does, lift it a little bit more. I don't know. It's kind of like I compare it the most to Dale Hernandez, where it just more of a complete game instead of just the flashes, where I think I could see him batting 280 with a 350 on base and approaching 500 slugging percentage early on the season before he eventually gets promoted to Aberdeen.
For the Shorebirds pitching staff, the headliner is De Leon, who goes back there despite an excellent run over the summer as the Shorebirds last year. Struck out over 27% of batters he faced. The only thing that I can think for the reason that De Leon is back in Delmarva is that he's really young. He's only 20. He's not going to turn 21 for, I think, a few more weeks. And the other is that maybe they want to see the walks come down a little bit before they give him that bump up to Aberdeen. But on De Leon's best nights, he looks like he belongs at a higher level. And I just get the sense that it's only a matter of time. Just get some innings under his belt, make sure that he's locating his pitches correctly. And when there's a spot open at Aberdeen, I would have to think that he's the first guy up.
Yeah, I have to imagine. It's like you said, maybe they want to get the walks a little more under control. And look, it's not going to hurt him to start back at Delmarva. He's still insanely young. If he pitches the way he did last year, he'll probably end the year in Billy, despite starting in Delmarva. Yeah, I think this is more about just the pipeline, a little full, a little clogged. He'll start here. I expect him to be one of, if not the first pitcher promoted to Aberdeen.
Fully agree with that. And as you look at the Shorebirds pitching staff, are there any other arms that you think our listeners should be keeping their eye on?
Yes, I do. Jacob Cravey, I know he is a guy that did not pitch after the draft last year. I know there was a lot of good reports about him, so I would keep your eye on him. Jared Beck, I think, is a sleeper to develop. 7 foot tall. Obviously, mechanics are hard, but I thought he flashed a lot of potential last year. So I think a guy that tall, it's probably going to take time to develop him a little bit more than other pitchers, but I think the upside is really high with him. Michael Foray, another draft pick who I don't think we saw. Very curious to see him. I know a lot of, or at least one person is super high on Trey Gibson, an undrafted free agent last year who is starting opening night on Friday night. So maybe that says something as well. And Blake Money is getting the start in the second game of the season for Delmarva, a guy who I thought, late round draft pick, reliever out of LSU. Like, okay, intriguing relief prospect. Here come the Orioles. He's starting game 2. Did they pull an Alex Pham on Blake Money for his namesake alone? I hope they did. But yeah, I think it's a lot of guys here that I'm like, I don't know what to expect. Like Gabriel Salazar is a former position player who transitioned to pitching last year, and he's made it up to Delmarva. That's cool. Here's a guy they signed off the street, Georgiani Casimiri. Hell of a name. I'm very curious to see what they have there. Braxton Bragg, another intriguing arm, a different type of arm than we're used to with these draft picks. I think he's more of like a sinker baller type of guy, but Nestor German, another draft pick who we didn't see. And when we talked to, who'd we talk to after the draft?
Joe Doyle.
Yeah. When we talked to Joe Doyle after the draft, we all were throwing our hands up in the air, like no idea what the Orioles have found here. So yeah, not as much excitement as like, oh, I can't wait to see Alejandro Mendez take the mound. Not as much as like the other levels, but I do think there's plenty of intriguing arms, and at least 3 or 4 of these guys who I don't have much expectations for. I'm expecting to be like, oh, okay, you have my attention.
Yeah, Money and Ferret are certainly interesting pitchers coming out of last year's draft. And then with Herman, want to see what he has to bring to the table. And Trey Gibson opening start for the Shorebirds. So we're going to get a sense out of the gate of what he brings to the table. So we'll just wrap up here with this. We've run down these 3 teams. You got to pick one to watch on Friday night. Who are you watching?
My honest answer is I'm be shuffling like crazy, going back and forth. But if I had to pick, it's Bowie. It's Samuel Basayo, that pitching staff. I got to go with Bowie, but you really can't go wrong. Honestly, I should do Bowie, you do Aberdeen, and Nick does Delmarva, and then we'll compare notes.
Well, I know that Nick's favorite level to watch early in the year is Delmarva, so I will let him take that while I take Aberdeen. They begin their season at Jersey Shore, 6:35 start. Their starting pitcher has not been announced just yet. As I mentioned earlier, Alex Pham will get the ball for the Bay Sox when they take on Reading. And then for the Shorebirds, Trey Gibson is slated to get the start against the Fredericksburg Nationals down at Virginia Credit Union Stadium in Fredericksburg. You're not going to want to miss that. And the good news is, with the Orioles playing at 4:35 on Friday afternoon, you'll have plenty of time to wrap that up and tune in to a minor league game. So we're excited to see the full return of full season minor league baseball now that it's here with us in 2024. Bob, any final thoughts?
Yeah, get used to Aberdeen not announcing their starting pitcher because they never do. You'll never know who's pitching till it gets really close to game time. And here we go. Perfect time to sign up for our Patreon. We will be having On the Verge dailies where if you don't have time to watch the games or even look at box scores and stay up to date with that, all you got to do, become a patron, get the RSS feed, and we will give you the daily update of all the stuff that happened the night before. And I think I'm excited to get into it. We'll be exhausted by it by the end of the season, but that's the joy of baseball.
You're not going to miss that over on our Patreon channel. And of course, you can find us on one or all of our many social media channels, including Facebook, Instagram, Threads, X, TikTok, and YouTube. Be sure to subscribe to YouTube. Our X channel gets a lot of traction during the season because Nick does a great job, as always, of sharing clips. But look for all of our social media channels to be active over the course of the 2024 season. For Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens, this is Zach Spedden. You've been listening to Orioles on the Verge, part of the Believe Podcast Network.